Welcome back to Paradigm, where we delve into the minds of fellow entrepreneurs in the region. Today, we're honored to have Paul Littlejohn with us as the founder of Wingman, a man who absolutely lives operational excellence, and here's why. With a career that's taking him from the adrenaline-fueled cockpit of a fighter jet to the strategic heights of the corporate boardrooms, Paul brings a wealth of experience and insights to the table. His journey through high stakes military operations and top tier corporate environments has equipped him with a unique perspective on leadership and mission success. Paul, I'm extremely excited to be having you in our studios today and absolutely dedicating this episode to your journey.
Good. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's really exciting, and I'm pleased to be here.
Perfect. So to kick off our interview, just tell me, obviously, how did that transition happen from being a pilot and, flying a fighter jet to opening up your business at the end of it?
It's been a long journey. So when I retired from the Royal Air Force about 10 years or so ago now, I ended up going to various different jobs within business and learning an awful lot about how companies work, how people work in the outside of the military. And I got to a stage where I felt that I should try something again different. A little bit of a curse here of making myself feeling uncomfortable. And so spent a lot of time with the entrepreneur community over the last 7, 8, 9 years, and I thought it was time that I gave it a try myself.
Perfect. Do you miss the regime?
What I miss about flying, the flying job, is really the people.
Okay.
I was really fortunate to work with some exceptionally talented people who made us all strive to be better every day. And that environment where people didn't know how to fail was exceptionally invigorating.
Right. And what does it mean to you to really embody all of those qualities of a wingman, as you called your company in both the military and now in the corporate world?
Absolutely. So when we were junior pilots, or when we were pilots, we always flew as two people. There was the lead and there was the wingman. And when I first started, the way we flew was this concept of visual mutual support, i.e. each of you was checking out the other one, making sure that we're in the right place at the right time, doing the right things, and providing that mutual support. And when I came out of the military and went into business, this was the leadership or the kind of working style that I was used to, and I started to apply. And the idea of a wingman is there's somebody there to provide you, whoever you are, with that visual mutual support, that guidance, that advice. Are we still on track? And be there for you as you execute whatever mission you're on.
Right.
And that really, for me, led itself into the name of the company, because I felt that's what the role I wanted to play as an entrepreneur was being at Wingman for people in business.
But you do believe that there is this kind of, call it an educational gap outside of high performing, institutions such as the military or like sports teams, professional sports teams. How can that gap, in your opinion, be addressed? And I suppose you address it with Wingman, right?
Absolutely. Certainly, we try to. For me, the amount of leadership training that I received as an officer in the Royal Air Force and as a pilot was consistent from the minute we started at selection through all of our training and all the way up until I left. We were involved in continual development of our leadership skills. And when I came into business, one of the things I noticed was there was a lot less of that. And I think it's a real challenge for the way that our leadership cultures evolve within companies. And I think there's a gap that's there to be filled. And so one of the things we try and do with Wingman is replicate some of that learning from all of that leadership training we had at various different levels of the organization, junior officer, senior officer, command level, and try and replicate the value that brings into getting groups of human beings to go and do remarkable things.
Right. And you believe that continuous learning and growth is crucial, right?
It's vital. I think that the more, at any stage of leadership really, but the more senior you become, I think it's important that leadership is broad, because those synergies or those random things you learn in another topic provide that breadth of experience which helps you be a leader. And so I think that one of the best qualities in a leader is this curiosity, this continual desire to find out how and why and about various different things. And I think that then makes you stronger as a person, but critically, it makes you stronger as a leader.
And what strategies would you say are the most important to kind of make sure that ongoing growth is still there, it's still kept?
I think curiosity is the big one.
Okay.
Is really finding out why things work, how they work the way they do. And that can be as simple as understanding why a team operates in a particular way, understanding why you have that particular contractual setup, working out something in a completely different field, how that works.
But this then helps you solve the issues that you might be facing along the way, obviously.
This is it. And it's bringing together these disparate bits of information into your kind of problem solving toolkit that becomes really powerful as a leader.
And what advice would you give, let's say, to all those aspiring entrepreneurs out there or even leaders that are kind of looking forward to developing their skills and to really innovate their whole leadership system within their company?
I think the most important thing to begin with is to understand what it means to be a leader. There is an element that thinks of leadership as being expertise. Whether you're in a corporate environment or whether you've had the idea and you've set up a company, that expertise is really vital. But at some point when you start getting other people to execute your ideas, the expertise isn't where you should be adding value. The expertise comes in two really big areas. There's the setting of direction, where are we going and why, problem solving that comes with that, and then really into that support of the team. So kind of three areas really. So it's understanding that role of leadership that evolves as you move from individual expert to leading other people to execute.
So would you say that experience and age is an absolute must to become a good leader?
I don't think. I mean, obviously, if you're doing it well, as you get older, you are consistently learning, and that's really powerful. I don't think it's necessary to be older to be a leader. When I joined the military as an officer at 21 years old, I was put in charge nominally of people much more experienced than me. That's not a requirement. Again, it's not a requirement to be the expert. It's a requirement to fulfill the role of leadership.
Right.
Direction, accountability, and support, that's what's required. And if you can do that, with then a bit of problem solving thrown in to boot to help that team out in that support function, then age isn't really the issue.
Right. And I mean, you did mention before the whole concept of visual mutual support, right? Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how does this actually apply to modern day leadership that we have in corporate world, let's say, these days?
For me, the world is interconnected. Nobody is the boss. Everyone's always got constraints. There's always somebody that's dictating what we do. And this idea that we should be working together is really powerful. You see this in all high-performing teams. There's this cohesion, there's this clarity about what the purpose is, what the mission is, and you see teams working together. We've all heard of the challenges within companies and big corporates where you have teams working against each other,
Right.
not providing that wingman support to each other. And there's lots of reasons for that. But really, for me, this idea that we are supporting each other as we move towards our objective is vitally important.
Right. And I mean, you did emphasize on planning throughout our conversation and when we spoke in the past. How important is it to plan, in your opinion, your mission? Whether it's in the military, whether it's, your day tomorrow, whether it's your business plan, how important is it?
It's there's a famous saying which is the plan is useless, but planning is essential. And I think one of the things that we don't do quite enough of is the right type of pre-mission planning or pre-operation planning. To explain that saying is that if you go and try and achieve something without a plan, everything that happens downstream of that is chaos.
Right.
Where was I supposed to be if it was working properly? Where am I now? And that's all unknowable if you didn't have a plan to begin with. The point of that sentence really is that you put together a plan that's got some hope of achieving the objective. And then you step out or you take off or you go to work that day knowing that things are going to disrupt the plan. Quite confident and happy that things are going to disrupt that plan because you can't control them. Bad luck, the enemy.
And I'm sure in your pilot life you've had a lot of
yeah, absolutely.
examples.
And this is why this is so ingrained in my way of thinking, because none of our plans, we would spend hours, a couple of hours before a mission, putting together a black line on a map with fuel figures and enemy threat rings and the
Right.
weather, And we were never on that black line once, but we knew how far away from it we were. And that gave us the communication, the ability to communicate to our wingman and say, well, we all know where we are, and therefore we're going to do this, and it would make sense.
And it wouldn't be as chaotic.
And it wouldn't need a long conversation about what do you think we're doing. We can say, look, we're over here, we're going to cut the corner, and we're going to point straight at the target. And they would go, okay, that makes sense, because they had the same situational awareness that we had as the flight lead. And this means that all of a sudden you've got a team that has got a plan in their head. They know how it was constructed. They're quite comfortable with the fact it's going to change in real time. And then communicating those changes and making those changes align with your plan, your mission, are much, much easier.
And this is where the hierarchy comes in as well, right? How important is it to actually give responsibilities to the staff that you have below you, and make sure that they have, that their neck is on the line in some of the missions that you placed?
This is, for me, is really important, because if any decision to change that operational plan has to go up to the boss, then everything that we do live is only as fast and only as good as the boss. And if you put that into a business environment, and it was just inconceivable in a flying environment. Imagine if every time I wanted to turn left or right and it wasn't on the map, I had to radio back to my boss in the squadron and say, hey, we're going to go off track a little bit here. Why are you doing that? Or we're trying to cut the corner, catch up. It's just infeasible.
And just to make our listeners, understand, you were going around 900 kilometers an hour at that point.
Yeah, you're doing 9 miles a minute constantly. You can't slow down. You can't have a conference. You can't have a quick chat about it. You're moving.
Let's get on a Zoom call.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, next month, because that's when everyone's free. So while the tempo isn't quite the same in business, the principle is the same. Right. Is that if every time your team wants to do something, they have to ask your permission, or you have to approve it, then the business is only ever as fast as your capacity. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many managers and senior executives are so busy, spend so many hours at work, is because they are the bottleneck.
And they don't work smart, they just work hard at that point.
Well, the system means that if you have to authorize everything, or if you have to tell everyone what to do, you can only be as fast and only as good as your awareness.
Right.
And what I prefer to do, and the analogy back to flying is that you send your team out on the mission. They know what you're trying to achieve. They're authorized to act within some boundaries, and they then do the best they can to achieve the mission.
Right.
And once you do that, you've suddenly got everyone in your team thinking, acting, working towards the mission. They are faster than you could ever be, because that communications line has been severed and they're now independent.
And they feel the responsibility to
They start to engage better because they've got autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which are the key things for this intrinsic motivation. And frankly, they're probably better. And the reason for that is that they are right there. They know what's going on. And as long as they're clear what they're trying to achieve, they are certainly over time, once this becomes more natural in the organization, they are going to start making better decisions.
Right.
And this was always true for me, because I wasn't a technical expert in any of the industries I've worked in. So they were definitely better than me. But I think even if you are an expert, times change, clients change, businesses change, ways of working change, they will be as good, if not better.
Of course, there's a shifting paradigm,
there you go.
Particularly in the region for that. But going back to Wingman now, I wanted to ask you, how does a typical day, as the founder of Wingman, how does your typical day look like?
I think a lot of it, this is one of the biggest challenges that comes out from being an entrepreneur, is that you have to go out there and find people that have got problems to solve. So there's a big chunk of the day, which is business development, which is looking for clients, talking to clients, listening to see what problems there are out there. That's really a big chunk of anything within entrepreneurial space, is identifying the client problems, identifying the clients, identifying the problems, and then after that, working out how to solve them. Yes. Yeah. Once you get onto the solving side, it's very much working with senior executives and with executive teams to understand what they're trying to achieve, the current leadership culture they've got, the operational challenges. Because while there are some fundamental principles to all of this, the application of these from any given business varies quite dramatically.
Right. You could have a specific leadership style that you like, but you cannot necessarily place it on your client if the atmosphere in the company is just not right for it, right?
Absolutely. And certainly in any case, not immediately. A
Right.
lot of what we do and a lot of what we've talked about today, when you start to put in practice, looks very different from the way a lot of companies run. And so there is a period of really ensuring that people believe it makes sense first.
Right.
How is it possible it's going to work better if I give all my people the decisions?
Right. And do you believe in making, let's say, workshops is something that could potentially bring up that efficiency, that productivity, and change that style that the company was just born with, unfortunately?
I love it as a mechanism, actually. Workshops are really, really powerful because they bring all bits of the organization together. Essentially, I simplify it and say you get the top-down intent and wishes, the vision, the mission, all that sort of stuff, and you get the bottom-up reality on the ground,
Right.
what life's really like. And when you start talking to people in businesses, you see there's this quite a big disconnect often between what people are being asked to do and what's possible on the front line.
Right.
And I think it's really important to join those two up to build this shared understanding and to build that trust and to start to build that dialogue. You see lots of leadership talks about communication and we should talk about what we're doing. And it's always artificial. It's an email or it's a TV presentation or it's a town hall meeting. I prefer that get in there with the team, discuss the issues in real time because people want to ask questions. And you need to be there to go, oh, I hadn't thought of that in that way.
Right.
And then you've got to have an answer for it because you're the boss. You're the leader. So you've got to square whatever their question is with what you want to do. And often that means you have to change what you intended to do. And that's the beauty of the workshop environment is that probably the mission will change a little bit, the behavior, the understanding will change. And at the same time, trust, shared understanding, communication, understanding of risk and understanding of the mission all gets much
Right.
better.
You must be like a proud psychologist after your workshops.
It does feel like this. I mean, it's working with people and everyone's different. Everyone's got a different background and a different set of experiences.
Right.
And the trick is to leverage those, not fight against those, not to try and bring conformity, which I think is a lot of people's perception of the military.
It's discipline.
There's this element of discipline, and that there is, and I say a lot of the stuff I talk about is about discipline. We have a saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And what that means is that if you go into the office and the paintings are all a mess and you've got junk everywhere and the desks are a mess, this isn't something we're proud of. Is that a standard we like? And if you as the boss walk past that every day, then everyone's going to go, that's okay. That's the standard we have in our
If you don't
company.
prioritize it, yeah.
So just making sure that whatever you think your standards are, that you live them
Right.
and you make them real. And I think, again, with the VMV, we have a lot of challenges with that. We set aspirational standards, but they're not really our standards and we don't live them.
Right.
And as soon as you do that, the people are very clever. They look at the boss and they go, what does he care about? What does
Why
she
should
care
I?
about?
Yeah.
What's important to them? That informs their decision making. And so the trick is to be very authentic in the way that you think and you lead. And that's why these workshop environments are great because you get to be your authentic self.
Of course, be the right mentor, be the right role model for your company. Now, since we did mention, the shifting paradigm before, I wanted to ask you, how do you perceive that evolving paradigm of business dynamics, particularly here in the UAE and in this region? And where do you place yourself and Wingman in this whole shift that's happening every now and then,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think what we're seeing in Dubai and seeing across the world, though, is the rise of Gen Z and millennials.
Right.
Very different ways of working, very different societal and educational upbringing. And of course, the boomers, Gen Xers like myself, we're getting older. And I think what we're seeing at the moment, particularly in Dubai, where you've got this young, dynamic, energetic population, a huge investment and desire for innovation within the city, sponsored by the city and the UAE and more generally, I think you're going to see a lot more discussions around the role of the generational gap, as people talk about it, how that's going to manifest itself, what each generation can learn from the others, and how we start to work better together, as opposed to talking about this generational gap. And I think for me, the paradigm shift over the next decade will be as you start seeing Gen X's move up to the very top of the corporate ladders. The millennials start to move into that exec senior management. From a corporate perspective, of course, you'll see Gen Z and millennials start to have more and more companies because of that much stronger drive, I think, and much more access, I think, to an entrepreneurial spirit.
With all the technology, I mean, it's
the speed and the ease
natural.
to set up a company today
Exactly.
is vastly different. Not that I was in that space when I was in my 20s and 30s doing something else, but if you're a Gen X at that time,
You were in the clouds.
yeah, absolutely, a lot harder to set up a company then.
Yeah.
Now you can do it in an afternoon. Landing page is done, Canva, AI, you're off and running, and then you're out to market. So again, there's potential you're going to see less people wanting to be in the corporate space because the opportunity to go and set
Be
up
your
your
own
own
boss.
business might be more. So I think you might see that change, that shift in where people's priorities are. So I think the big paradigm shift will be how is these generations, the millennials, Gen Zs, how are they going to approach their 30s and 40s in terms of work? And I think it's going to be very different than the boomer generation, certainly my generation, that at least started with this idea that you got a profession, you went and had a job, you stayed in a company for a while. That's no longer even close to being the mindset, I think.
Well, only time will tell.
Absolutely.
But as long as, education is there and that gap is slowly, as you said, reduced, I think that would be extremely, extremely important.
Yeah.
Now, one of my final questions that I wanted to ask you before we get to our audience questions is, if I were to give you a time machine and you can go all the way back in time, although you did travel by the speed of sound, what would you tell a younger version of yourself?
I knew this question was coming, but it doesn't make it any easier. No, I think for me, and certainly in this phase of my career, it is the power of a network. And I guess I'll try and bring it back into the Wingman thing. This having people to provide you that visual mutual support, people that can provide you expertise, guidance from wherever. And I think as I've gone through my various stages of careers, this hasn't been a priority for me that maybe it could have been. And I think that would have been the thing that I would go back and say, hey, look, take every opportunity to build those relationships with people that you meet, to build that network of wingmen
And stay in touch with them.
that are there to support you. I'm very lucky that the military fraternity is very strong. And we can not see each other for 5 years, 10 years. And when we meet, it's back as if it always was.
It's a brotherhood, yeah.
Bonds forged in adversity and hardship.
Right.
But that's not true in the private sector. You don't have quite that inherent bond because you spend a couple of years working with somebody. And I think it's really important to, the advice I would give myself and the advice I would give to others is that don't negate that part of the business space. Build those networks, build those connections, provide that visual mutual support, and I think you'll be better off for it.
Right. Well, let's move on to our audience questions now. I have 3 that I've picked out as my top choices. We have the first question from Matthew.
Okay.
What's the craziest thing that ever happened to you during a high-stakes military mission? Any near-death experiences?
Great.
I mean, even I had this question for you.
Absolutely. So, so this was a mission in northern Norway. We were doing a training mission out there as part of our role in a post-Cold War scenario, put it that way.
So we're talking about like minus 40?
Minus 40 degrees, wrapped up in all the clothes we could find, and operating training missions in the region to be aware of the hazards. There's wires, there's fjords, there's mountains, there's all challenging things. And so this was an area we'd go to train regularly with the squadron I was on. And we had an issue with my wingman's airplane, and we diverted into a small airfield on the Baltic Sea. And as we landed in there, we landed, taxied in. We did some diagnostic work, chatting to the engineers back from the main airfield, and managed to get his jet fixed. And then my airplane broke. So
excellent.
Yeah, there we go. So no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So he flew home because we had some priorities to get him and his jet back to the squadron. I stayed there waiting for an engineering team to come out and fix my airplane. team came out, minus 40. We're stood around the airplane. We've got a vehicle there. We've got hot tea inside. They're doing about 5 minutes repairing the airplane, then back in. Eventually, the airplane gets fixed. And I taxi out to the end of the runway. And it's now dark. We've got a weather front coming in. And as I take off, one of my primary instruments fails on me. And I end up at night below cloud, without really knowing where I am in space at that point in time.
I'm getting goosebumps just listening to this.
And so there's mountains all around. So there was a moment there where I had to revert back to all the training we'd had, revert down to standby instruments, recover the aeroplane, climb up to altitude, and then make my way home. And it was outside of combat. Nobody was shooting at me, but just the combination of the experiences, the time of day, the weather, the proximity of the mountains.
And I mean, you're there with your computer and your computer fails on you and you're alone at that point.
Yes, absolutely. And it just...
and an unknown geography, right?
Very much so. And a very scary place to end up outside the aeroplane as well at minus 40. So there's lots of priorities there to try and keep everything going. And it's one of those I remember because my brain was just a million miles an hour trying to process what was going on. But
actually, I can't imagine, but...
all ended up well. I'm still here today.
Yes, he's still here with us today, Matthew. Hopefully that answered your question. Moving on now to Amanda. She asked, how does the movie Top Gun differ from actual fighter jet pilot's life? This is a cool one.
What I think is amazing about both the Top Gun movies was the live action. I mean, they did an amazing job of demonstrating life inside the cockpit, the physicality of it, the dynamicism of it, and that's all amazing.
Feels like a GoPro was just placed inside.
It really was, and it's just phenomenal what they showed. Certainly in the second movie, obviously, it just became amazing. I think the big thing that you see that's different is that you see that snapshot in the air and not all that planning and preparation that goes into executing like that.
All right.
And I think
so everything we spoke about today, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a famous line from the Top Gun movie which talks about if you think you die, don't think. You haven't got time to think.
Right.
And I think it's a nice nod to the speed. We talked about it earlier on. You are constantly progressing. There isn't time for these long discussions about what we should do next. But I think it misses the point that the reason you can operate in that way, you can do things without thinking, is because of the intense planning and preparation that's gone on and the shared understanding and the coherence between the team that allows execution without complex thinking at that point in time.
And at that point, yeah, your subconscious is just in survival mode, right?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, we process stuff in a way that means that you don't have too much to think about. But that's a skill in and of itself. Prioritizing all the appropriate tasks, doing the sufficient planning, that allows you to focus your attention. And then when you have you get into that dogfight, you become very much attention focused on that particular moment in time.
So not for ADHD people.
Possibly not.
All right, Amanda, hopefully that answered your question. Up next, we have a question from Yad. How did you navigate the shift from the structured environments of the military and corporate world to the more autonomous world of entrepreneurship?
Yes, with difficulty. It's a real challenge, actually.
There you go, Yad. It was hard.
No, I mean, and there's kind of two phases of that. One, coming out of the military into the private sector. There was an element which I found hugely exciting. Silly things. When I got into consulting, everyone was known by their first name. Right? In the military, I had sir, I had boss, and that was it. And they were squadron leader or wing commander or group captain. And suddenly my partner in a consulting firm was Rich.
Does that mean I have to call you Littlejohn?
So that was the first thing, was this kind of freedom. The lack of structure was quite liberating to begin with when I came out into the corporate world. I think the big jump for me is coming from the corporate world into the entrepreneur space, where every day somebody gave you work to do. And your job was to do that work very well as you could do it. Mm-hmm. And suddenly you're out in the private sector, you're out as an entrepreneur, and no one's giving you work unless you go and find it.
Right.
And that now changes that whole dynamicism we talked about earlier on, is that part of your life is building a pipeline of work, meeting clients, understanding problems, generating that, so you can then go and do excellent work, right, which used to be the thing that I spent time on. So that for me was a really interesting shift. A shift in both career changes, really, but most interesting now.
All right. Jod, hopefully that answered your question. And I mean, time's running out, unfortunately, Paul, but it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Likewise.
Very insightful conversation. We wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
And I really hope to see you again very soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mina.
And that concludes another insightful episode of Paradigm. A huge thank you to Paul Littlejohn for sharing his invaluable wisdom with us today. If you want to learn more about driving your business forward with battle-tested strategies, be sure to stay tuned to Entrepreneur TV Middle East and Wingman. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on this episode. And until next time, keep innovating, keep evolving, and keep reshaping the future. With you was Mina Wucht.